Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Geek Warning from the Escape Collective. I'm James Huang. We've got the full Escape Collective tech crew on hand today, including Dave Rome in Australia. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
And we also have Ronan McLaughlin in Ireland. Hi, Ronan.
Hello. How's it going?
How is everyone doing today? Dave, you're looking a little rough.
Oh, I'm feeling much better though. So yeah, a week off. Not feeling so good, and I'm on the mend.
Good to hear it. Ronan, your hair is looking pretty spectacularly poofy today.
Yes. Not sure why that is. I treated it to a blow dry after the shower, so
there you go. That'll do it. I haven't used a blow dryer in 20 years, I think.
Why not?
It's just it's not worth it. Let's just put it that way. My head pretty much comes out of the shower dry already as it is. So freshly shaven as of today, I think, actually. Anyway, we've got a whole big pile of tech news to get through today, including the new Orbea Orca GT Grid and Polygon Bend. We've got some pretty stunning new wheels from Syncros, of all people, to talk about. We've got a juicy little bit of news about a legacy brand that might just be staging a comeback. We're going to talk about RockShox's new SID cross-country suspension and mountain bike brands getting into gravel in general. We'll then see what everyone's got on their minds this week and then close out with a PSA as usual. But first, a little PSA of our own. Longtime listeners of Geek Warning will probably have noticed that we don't run any ads on this show, and that's because everything we do at Escape Collective is directly funded by you, our subscribers and members. Being a full Escape Collective member gets you full access to everything on the site, comments included, as well as a ticket to our members-only Discord channel and live podcast recording sessions, which actually we need to schedule one of those soon. If you'd rather lurk instead of participate, you can get yourself a subscription instead of a membership. We've got monthly and annual options starting at just $7 US a month. So hopefully you can make some room in your budget for us. If you're already a member, thanks a ton for the support. If you like what you're getting in return, please tell your buddies about Escape Collective so that they can consider joining too. And if by some small chance you're not happy with what you're getting, please tell us why. We're all pretty easy to get a hold of on social media or otherwise. Head over to escapecollective.com/join to sign up. And finally, a quick shout out to some of our lifetime members who played a big role in getting Escape Collective off the ground just a few short months ago. Big thanks go out to Tony and Judy Van Bergen in Australia, Eric Poley, Jake Byrne, and Chris Schultz. We've also got a few industry folks to thank for their lifetime contributions, including Darren Baum of Baum Cycles, Dirk Friel from Training Peaks, and Marco Toselli from the Sella Royal Group. Thanks to all of you for the assist. All right, and with that,
Thank you.
With the show. First up in this long list, Orbea's got a new Orca. If I'm remembering correctly, I think it's the 7th generation Orca now. That the Basque brand is very specifically pigeonholing this generation as a lightweight climbing bike. It is pretty light at 750 grams claimed for a 53 centimeter top end frame, 360 grams for the matching fork. There's also a second tier frame, the Orca OMR. The top end one's the OMX. The OMR comes in at 1,030 grams for the frame and 410 for the fork, and between both, there are over a dozen complete models available. If you're a pretty diehard weight weenie, you can say that those numbers are light, but not crazy light, especially for something billed as a climbing bike. But Orbea says that the other priorities in the design of this thing were ride quality and stiffness, which are both good things to have. There are a bunch of custom options through the Orbea's Mayo program, which actually there's a ton of custom paint options available at no extra charge, which is pretty cool. And I'd argue that the bike actually looks pretty sweet, especially if you're into more traditional lines. I'm kind of curious, what do we think of this thing? There's a lot of finger pointing going on here. Ronan, you are the designated climber of the bunch. I'm really especially interested to hear your perspective here.
Former climber. Very much former climber these days.
Former as in what, like 2 weeks ago?
He is a former climber because when I asked for his notes on the classified hub system, he sent me a few paragraphs explaining how he had optimized at the RAS race, that he had optimized for the flats and the rolling terrain, and that the hills were not a critical moment, and that he was happy to give up the weight and any efficiency losses on the hills because they weren't going to be an important part of the race to him. So yeah, I'm shocked, but anyway, this is a new Ronan we're dealing with, James.
Okay, fine. We won't describe you as a climbing specialist. Why don't we just say that you are optimization chameleon. How about that?
I'm a bit happier with that. Yeah, definitely a bit happy with that.
All right. Anyway, what do you think of this thing?
Getting back to it, I mean, at the moment, I don't think a whole lot, simply because I don't know a whole lot about it. We were expecting the test bike to arrive in, and that hasn't done so yet. And I sort of handed off duties on the news story last week on this bike to yourself. I was sort of inundated with time trial optimization stuff following that Tour de France thing that happened over the last few weeks. But I think, I mean, as you mentioned there, it's not stunningly light, but I think what Orbea are sort of saying here is that it's lightweight, but also rides presumably exceptionally well from what I took from reading your piece. And I think the big takeaway, at least from the sort of chatter that I've seen online, was about the shift in terms of modern bikes and disc brakes and electronic grip sets and power meters and all the rest, and making them now lightweight. And it seems like we went through the disc brake revolution and then the aero revolution, and probably both at the same time. And now all of a sudden we're into this sort of lightweight focus with, was it Factor recently had the O2 come out? Canyon obviously had the Ultimate recently. Specialized sort of kicked it all off with the Athos. And are we back to square one as cyclists, where we're now focused on weight again? Personally, I think it's a very different, bikes are very different now when we're trying to make them lightweight than they were 10 years ago when we're trying to reduce the weight. And as such, the one thing I find myself repeatedly having to write and say, and I want this to be sort of the last time that I have to repeat myself, is that
it won't be.
No, it won't be. But anything under 6.8, anything under 6.5, anything that begins with 6 is, in this day and age, what I'm going to refer to as a lightweight bike. And if I remember correctly, Orbea have done that. So, what is there, 100 and something grams between this and an Athos? 150 or so, I think.
About, yeah, I think this one is 750. The lightest weight Athos is like 600, right around there. So in terms of percentages, this Orca is quite a bit heavier than the Athos. But in terms of absolutes, and we do know, 150 grams in terms of climbing times, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. I'm glad you mentioned that Athos, Ronan, because that has proven to be a pretty spectacularly popular road bike for Specialized. And I think they kind of nailed it in the sense that, not everyone is out to save every particular second. So not everything has to be like hyper aero optimized and everything. There is a lot to be said for a bike that just feels really light and good underneath you. So I guess one thing I didn't mention about this Orca is it's not aero at all. It's mostly like rounded tube profiles for the most part. Like, it doesn't claim to be aero anything aside from having the cables be hidden underneath the barn stem. So they're not fully internally routed, which is kind of nice.
Which, is as much an aesthetics thing as it is an aero thing these days.
I think it's more an aesthetics thing in this case.
More. Yeah.
So it does, aesthetically, I think it looks fantastic, especially if you're into kind of more traditional bikes. It just looks really good.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's kind of Orbea's, the Orca's strong suit, right? It has been traditionally, is aesthetics. That's, generally speaking, anyone that I've ever known to have one, they've bought it because they connect with the brand and they connect with how it looks. They just like it as a bike, and I think that's fundamentally what's going to sell these things is, on paper, it's as we said, it's not the lightest, certainly not the most aero. It's probably a pretty nice riding bike. I haven't ridden it, but fundamentally, the people buying this are buying it because they like the look of it.
Well, and what I also found kind of neat was on our Escape Collective Discord channel, there were a bunch of members who were already playing with that Mayo custom paint program and kind of posting up little photos of what they had come up with. And, one thing that I forgot to mention in the article that's up on the site is if you go with the Orbea house brand wheels, you also have the option of getting decals to match your frame. So, you end up with like a really nice cohesive package. So again, might not be the lightest. I should say that the pricing, if I remember correctly, actually does look pretty good. If I remember, it's a decent chunk less expensive than an Athos. And then you add in what presumably is supposed to be really good rod quality. The Orcas have always handled really nicely. Again, like they look good, the custom paint option, then I don't know, it seems like there's a fair bit going here. I've always just liked Orbea as a brand too. Like I think they do good stuff.
Yep. Those house brand wheels, it's worth noting, they're new as well, and they're being made in Spain. It's like
semi-hooked.
Yeah, so that's probably one to look into in future, but it's it's kind of a fresh brand that they've built a new manufacturing facility for. So it's quite cool.
Do we want to briefly touch on what semi-hooked means?
Yeah, mini hooks.
Yeah.
That much I got.
And yeah, in regards to the semi-hooked thing or mini hooks, however you want to call it, basically Orbea is building these wheels. They're not hookless, but they don't have as prominent a bead hook as you might normally see in a hooked rim. I think if I remember correctly, I think it might have been Campagnolo who kind of started doing the kind of mini hook thing. The claim is basically that you get some of the benefits of hookless in terms of the tire to rim transition, but because you have even just that little bit of a hook, supposedly the tire security is better and the tire compatibility is better. So essentially, if you have a tire that is approved for use on a hooked rim, you supposedly can use it on that rim. So that does kind of open up possibilities. And it's kind of a neat little thing that I don't know. It seems like kind of a decent compromise, although I'm not really sure where that whole thing sits within the whole ETRTO universe. So, is that technically considered a hooked rim? I don't know, but that whole thing is just a giant quagmire that we should probably dedicate an entire episode to someday.
What would be the acronym of a mini hook? Got, TSS for tubeless straight side. Yeah. I'm just overcomplicating this now.
Maybe just the shrug emoji. I don't know. Anyway, hopefully that test bike will show up on your doorstep at some point, Ronan, because I really would like to hear how this thing rides. So, Orbea, if you're listening to the show, please get that going. We would love to see how this thing does. Another new bike that just got announced is the third generation of the GT Grade. The Grade has been kind of a sleeper, kind of all-road / gravel bike for a long time. This one retains GT's signature triple triangle profile, where the seat stays meet the top two well forward of the seat tube. The seat stays actually don't touch the seat tube at all, which GT says allows the seat tube to kind of flex more on bumps. And the seat stays themselves, they're actually not hollow like you normally get. They're solid. So it's sort of like a carbon fiber wrapped fiberglass. And GT says that is also meant to provide more flex. And with all those, between where the seat stays attach and what they're made of and how small they are. So GT is claiming that you get up to 30 millimeters of travel at the saddle. They're calling it, quote, gravel travel, unquote. Very clever. Very, very clever. Some of those models also get dedicated gravel suspension forks and dropper seat posts if you really want to get rowdy. You got a whole bunch of mounts for attaching stuff. There's an easy to maintain partially internal cable routing, threaded bottom brackets, clearance for 40 mil plus tires. The frame geometry is pretty progressive. The reach dimensions are quite long. A whole bunch of models in both carbon and aluminum. Top end model is $4,000 US for a SRAM Apex 1 mechanical drivetrain. That's the 11-speed stuff, not the new 12-speed stuff. Yeah. That bike also comes with a RockShox Rudy Explore fork. And then the least expensive Grade Elite is aluminum, $1,300 US, mix of Shimano Claris and FSA stuff, including Tektro mechanical disc brakes. Yeah. I mean, the complete builds are admittedly kind of underwhelming for me here, but I am intrigued by this whole gravel travel frame because having ridden some of the previous iterations of the GT Grade, those bikes do actually ride pretty okay, quite nicely actually. So I'm curious what that bike feels like. But
getting
the bigger thing,
real throwback to the Velagi road bike, the first disc brake road bike vibes with that design.
Very much so.
Which is, it's definitely not a bad bike to be inspired by. For those that aren't familiar, Velagi was, I think it was the first disc brake road bike, wasn't it? It was a few ex-Specialized employees sort of started their own sort of endurance road bike brand, and they had this this bike that had that sort of same like seat stay design that went straight to the top tube.
Indeed.
And it was, released at a time where none of the main group set manufacturers offered disc brake group sets. So every bike I ever saw and the one I tested had sort of like TRP calipers mounted to a mechanical group set. And
oh yeah,
still a nice riding
quick
frame.
release, open dropout, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was certainly ahead of its time, for better or worse.
Yeah.
And yeah, this does use some aspects of how that frame was made. My guess is that the back end of this bike is actually probably going to ride pretty smoothly.
Yeah.
But yeah, the complete builds are just kind of like, yeah,
it's pretty underwhelming to see like Apex 11 speed still in use, and yeah, that cheaper build's probably not going to be the best performing thing given our experience with those parts in the past.
Yeah, I'm just not really sure what to think, because again, like some of the things on that frame, like the geometry looks really, really progressive. The medium frame has like a 405 mil reach, which is super long.
Mm-hmm.
It would put the front wheel way out there, very short stem, very kind of like mountain bike-esque handling, which I think could be really fun in rough terrain. Like I'm not even sure if GT is offering that grade as a frame only, but I would almost be curious what that bike would feel like with a better build kit.
Yeah, indeed. But anyway, I'm intrigued. I'd like to ride one at some point.
Yeah, so we'll see if an opportunity arises. I dare say if we put in a request, one would probably show up for a loaner. What I'm super intrigued about, however, Dave, you were just telling me about this bike the other day, is that the new Bend from Polygon.
Yeah.
Sounds like a pretty amazing deal. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, Polygon's kind of been smashing it in the value front on a lot of bikes, and they at least in Australia for the last 10 years, should I say. And they recently, that company that is so price competitive, Bikes Online, they've expanded into the US in recent years, so you can also get their sort of hard-hitting pricing there too. And yeah, this new Bend, it's very similar in, I guess, in design and application to the GT Grade you just discussed, or something like a Giant Revolt X. So they've got a model that has front suspension and sort of like a SRAM Eagle drivetrain, 1x drivetrain, so wide range. It's built on an alloy frame, which Polygon, they're an Indonesian manufacturer, aluminium specialist, so it's in-house. They make it themselves. It's basically factory direct. But this bike, so you get Novatec carbon wheel set, you get a Fox AX32 fork, you get a Reverb Axis Explore seat post, you get a SRAM GX Eagle Axis group set. Any guesses on the US price, James?
US price?
Keeping in mind you said $4,000 for that GT Grade with Apex 11 speed.
Mechanical. Oh, is there any possible way that Polygon is less expensive than that GT? Really? Okay, what's the actual US official price?
$3,700.
Wow. I mean, granted, that's with an aluminum frame instead of a carbon one, but still, I mean, that for gravel, I would argue for a lot of people that aluminum makes more sense anyway. But that is a killer price point, like unreal. Yep.
So 5,300 Aussie, 3,700 US, and it kind of reminds me of like, I'm trying to think of, is it like Motor Beacon maybe? Like you used to get these brands that were basically like parts kit bikes, where you like the parts were worth more than the bike, if that makes sense. So you'd buy the bike, you'd strip it down, chuck the frame, and you'd use those parts on something else. This is almost achieving that. The frame doesn't look terrible though. Like I'm sure this frame is perfectly sufficient to do its job, and it has all the features that you'd want.
There's more mounts than I've ever seen anywhere.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Yeah, you can have every bag you want with this bike. You can spend
multiples of them.
You can spend more on bags than the whole bike costs, and still have spare mounts with this bike. So anyway, it's just the price that's most impressive with this one. There's also a more rigid version, which has a rival Axis Explore group set on it, rigid fork, and that's just $3,000 US. So yeah, I mean it's pretty cool. There's a ton of tire clearance in this frame. So anyway, I might get one in to test. I've actually got a different Polygon in to test at the moment, so that's why I haven't got one of these. But yeah, once I get past that more road going Polygon that I've got, and then maybe we'll look at this.
Well, I'd love for you to get one of those in, because I'm really, I would love to see how that thing performs. Because one thing I've always said about bikes in general is, regardless of what the manufacturing cost is for aluminum versus carbon or anything, good geometry really costs nothing other than experience, I would say, and that Polygon looks like it could be pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I definitely still don't see very many of those here in the US at all, but maybe that'll change moving forward. I mean, it's hard to pass up a good deal like that, especially if the bike is pretty good quality. And honestly, I feel like the fact that they're making it themselves is a good thing. It obviously cuts down on the kind of like a lot of middleman sort of stuff. But it's also nice that because they're making it themselves, they're not just sort of like contracting out to some cheap manufacturer somewhere. So like it might actually be a better bike. So we will see. Moving to the opposite end of the pricing spectrum, Syncros is a house brand of Scott. They recently introduced some super fancy new road wheels. Particular interest are the top-end Capital SL Aero. Those use a completely one-piece molded carbon fiber construction. They're crazy light at right around 1,300 grams, considering that they're also 60 mils deep and supposedly have some of the best drag numbers around. They're also super wide, super stiff, and yet they actually ride really nicely. They're definitely not inexpensive at all at $4,100 US. However, when you look at what else these wheels are trying to compete against at this end of the market, like the lightweights and Partingtons and that sort of thing, it's not even just not bad. Like they almost kind of seem like a bargain.
Let's say they seem better. Let's not say they seem like a bargain. Let's say they seem better. Is that fair to say?
It's all relative.
I get James's point, because like I said, a Partington's is it's 9,000 Australian, which I think is like 6 and a bit US maybe.
I think the Partingtons are like 6,500 or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean that's not a small price difference.
No, and then the lightweights are even more. And then I would argue, granted, I have not ridden the Partingtons and I haven't ridden any lightweights in a fair bit. But if you only look at the numbers in terms of like rim depth and rim width and aerodynamic profiles and stuff like that, I mean, these Syncros wheels blows all of that stuff out of the water.
That was what caught my attention whenever we were sort of messaging back and forth about the wheels there, James. And I think at one point I had confused the internal rim widths that you had given me. I hadn't confused it. I just assumed that you were referring to external rim widths, and I was like, oh yeah, here we go, super light, but they're very narrow, and they're not going to integrate all that well in terms of aerodynamics with the trend towards wider tires. Then you put me straight that no, those are actually internal rim widths, and the external rim widths are as impressive as not as impressive, but when you consider also the depth of the rim and the width and then the weight on top of that, very quickly I started to very, very much regret having you review these wheels and not myself.
Well,
deeply regretted that every day since then.
If it's any consolation, I'm already about to put these things back in a box and send them off. I mean, maybe I should just relabel these and just ship them off to Ireland.
Ronan's now got a photo of them on his bedside table. He just looks at them lovingly every day.
It sounds like if I ever want to be a climber again, these are the wheels that I need.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. I mean, 'cause it's funny, like, we were talking earlier about that Specialized Athos. And when I was riding, or when I was testing these wheels, the thought that kept going through my head was that the bike that I was on is it's an NV Custom All Road. It's not especially light. It's definitely nowhere near the weight of an Athos. But the thing that kept going through my head when I was riding this thing and going up climbs was that this thing reminds me suddenly a whole lot of how I felt when I was testing the S-Works Athos, like the super light version. And then it dawned on me that that's probably the case, because these Syncros wheels, despite being so much deeper, they are basically the same weight as the Roval Alpinist wheels. They're shallow, super light climbing wheels. So the whole bike that I was on was obviously heavier than that complete S-Works Athos, but the wheel weight was pretty much bang on with those shallow wheels, and just like going uphill, these wheels just felt absolutely amazing. And then going down or on the flats, like it just carries so much more speed than a shallow wheel.
I mean, for me, the big talking point with these wheels and say Zip that also and MV that also do the same thing is the 25 millimeter internal width hookless rim. I've ridden like I've previously tested like say Zip, the 353 NSWs, and my kind of takeaway was that for the person that wheel set's best suited to, I'm kind of the feeling that the 25 millimeter internal width and hookless is slightly too wide, like because that person's going to want to run like a 28 or 30 mil tire, and that squares off the tire a little bit. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with that, or you think this is actually an optimal width?
It's an interesting question because I guess speaking of the internal width and external width, so at the top end, for the capital SL, there is a capital SL Aero that I was just talking about, and then there's also a capital SL, which is slightly shallower, like 40 mils deep. The capital SL, those wheels are 25 mil internal front and rear. The SL Aero is 25 mil internal rear, 23 mil front. So it's actually a little bit narrower up front, but the external width is like 32 rear and 31 front, something like that. And they came with the new Schwalbe Pro 1 Aero tires. And we still don't have a whole lot of info on these tires from Schwalbe, but from what I can tell, the front tire in particular, they are front and rear specific, which is interesting. The front tire has a slightly elongated cross section. So they're definitely not squared off for sure, but they're also not like especially pointy. As far as the whole tire and rim width thing goes, particularly on hookless, I mean, I continue to be a little uncomfortable with I think it's a 10% safety margin officially between what you are supposed to be able to inflate these with versus what the tire is likely going to blow off at. I mean, in generally speaking, in engineering terms, a 1.1 safety factor is not very much.
No, especially when most people's floor pumps are probably only accurate to within 20%.
Yeah, so I mean that just the fact that you have that huge a possibility for error is pretty disconcerting. Again, that's maybe a topic for another whole episode.
Yes.
But I did talk to Syncros about the kind of the limitations of pressure and like heavier riders and what they should do, especially if they kind of fall outside of the recommended tire pressure for their weight. And they were saying essentially that if you need more pressure than the 5.5 bar or 72 psi, something like that, they're saying basically that you need to go up a tire size. So instead of a 28 mil marked tire, you need to go up to a 30. And at that point you would lose some of the aero benefit, but not that much. I mean, clearly, the weight limit on these wheels is pretty remarkably high. If I remember correctly, the rider plus bike weight limit is 120 kilos, which is a lot. It's like 245 pounds or something. It's like 265. Sorry. That's a lot. Granted, it's still a little bit of a bummer that you are somewhat limited in terms of how big a rider you can be to extract the full benefit of these wheels. But that again, the whole hookless thing is. I know you can't see me, people who are listening to this, but I am shaking my head. Yeah,
and that's just the sticking point for me with these wheels. Is just, and it's the same sticking point with Zip and MV and all those. But yeah, it's just
mini hooks for everyone.
Yeah, I don't know. No, it's just, and it's not just the hookless. It's just the rim width as well for me. It's just anyway.
I don't mind the rim width thing.
I think it's the rim width with the hookless. It's the combination of those two, isn't it, Dave? Isn't that?
Yeah, I think so.
Question I had. It was just on the new Schwalbe Aero tires, James. What were they that you said they were front and rear specific? So were they like marked 28s or what were they actually?
They were marked as 28s, but what makes them front and rear specific is partially the cross section shape, like I mentioned, but then also the tread cap on the front is thinner. It's like a 0.8 mil or something tread like mil. It's the rubber's quite thin up front, so they try to make these things as speedy as possible, obviously.
What did you measure the size and what they measured inflated on the Syncros wheels?
I did. If I remember, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but if I remember correctly, I think the rear came out to be about 31 and the front was somewhere around 30. So they puffed up quite a bit, but they still fell within the I guess the outer bounds of the maximum rim width, which I found pretty impressive considering how big the tires were.
I mean, like, yeah, not getting into it all again, but the whole ETRTO thing that we discussed so many times at the start of this year or whatever.
If I had hair, I'd be pulling it out right now.
Yeah, but it's now saying nothing less than a 29 mil wide tire. And then the point I'm trying to get to is, running around the Tour de France with a set of vernier calipers, I don't think we've yet hit the upper limit of how wide we're going to go on road tires. Pogacar, for example, was riding, okay, they were marked 28s, but his tires again were measuring 31 millimeter.
But how well did that work out for him?
Well, I mean, yeah, maybe that's where he went wrong, but I don't think so because he didn't. I'm just racking my brain here trying to remember, did he crash at any point during the tour? I don't think he did, but I don't think the tires were to blame. He crashed going uphill one day. Anyway, the point I was getting to, I don't think we've hit the upper limit yet of road tire widths. I don't think 28 is where we're going to stop. I think 30 is maybe the more likely.
30 to 31 measured seems to be like the ideal settling point, and a really good width for like the common consumer as well. But
yeah,
for my point is that's kind of like, that's like your bare minimum when you've got a 25 mil internal width rim. You put a 28 on that, you're getting a 30 to 31 mil tire out of it.
Where I'm wondering, are we going as well as like with the next generation of tires, perhaps we stick with 28s, but are we magically going to move to 29s that are slightly different somehow and going to better fit with these? Basically the question I'm asking is, are the rims ahead of the tires and are the tires on the way? And then, with, at least as far as my understanding goes, based on an article that I've written, should be published by the time you're listening to this podcast. One of the things I was talking to Dov Tate, who's the founder of Parkour Wheels, a British brand, he was telling me that basically if you have to run a tire that is going to be wider than ideal for the rim that you've got, so if you're going to fall outside the rule of 105 and your tire is going to be more than 105% of or not only is your tire going to be too wide, but it's going to be sort of the inverse. Instead of the rim being wider than the tire is much wider than the rim. If you've got a deeper rim, like this SL Aero is a 60 millimeter rim, then you have a better chance of the rim still being able to sort of recapture, reattach the airflow the sort of turbulent airflow coming off the tire and still give you that sort of aero benefit. If you imagine if you had a 30 mil rim hidden in behind a tire that was far too wide, you're not really going to get those aero benefits. Whereas at least if you've got a deeper rim, you'd still have a chance of getting some sort of aero gain off of it. So I think in a roundabout way, what I'm sort of saying is it might not all be lost in terms of having too wide a tire on these wider rims. Yeah.
I think your point about rim is like, are the rim technology and rim widths ahead of the tire technology? I think that's spot on. And even in mountain bike, I think that still applies. It's like 30 mil has become the kind of the new standard internal width across most mountain bikes. And there's a lot of tires that are still catching up. Like Maxxis, for example, they do what they call a wide tread, where the tread's actually designed for that wider rim, so the tire doesn't get squared off as much. It stays more round across its casing. And I think we might perhaps need to see that in the road side of things. If we've got brands that are pushing this 25 mil internal width, and we've got people wanting to run 28 mil quoted tire sizes on these rims, then perhaps we need a tire that is more bulbous to achieve a round shape without being massively wide. It kind of sounds like the Schwalbe Aero maybe is playing to that, James.
I think they are. I mean, supposedly these tires and rims were designed kind of together with each other. They were launched on the same day. They're very much in some sort of collaborative project here. And I would say that these tires, as I mentioned, they definitely did not seem unusually squared off at all. The tread cap was, like, although it was thin, it wasn't unusually narrow. So it didn't look like the tread cap was designed for a rim that was appreciably narrower than these Syncros wheels. So it all seemed to go pretty well together. I mean, I do think that we don't have much of a choice but to now design tires around these wider rim widths. And I think we've already started to see some of that. I mean, if you want to look at Envy, for example, I mean, they've been marketing their own brand of tires for a little while now, and we already see that they've kind of changed their tire sizes, or I guess either changed or updated, I can't remember. But like, instead of what used to be like 23, 25, 27, they're like, they're or 23, 25, 28, sorry, excuse me, they're like, they're 29s and they're 31s. They're just like 1 millimeter more. But maybe that's to kind of get around ETRTO stuff that they knew was happening. I can't say. But for sure, wheel and rim brands and tire brands, they desperately need to get on the same page here for a variety of reasons. And my God, I can go off for an hour on just how much this whole thing frustrates me, because I just think it's so incredibly stupid.
All right.
So,
well, I think it's a topic we've covered in depth before, probably due for an update on. So perhaps we have an episode dedicated to it in the future.
If nothing else, I think I need to devote maybe my next column to this, because I've got some thoughts and feelings on this for sure.
Yep.
Can you include your thoughts on where the rim manufacturers might go next when the tire manufacturers finally catch up to the 25 internals?
26 mil.
Oh, dear God. Okay. All right. Let's wrap up this Syncros wheel discussion. Moving on to another wheel issue, or I shouldn't even say issue, a little bit of juicy wheel news. So that legacy brand that I mentioned earlier that is going to be making a comeback. So the company that I'm talking about is Mavic. So I kind of described this as sort of like a juicy rumor, but it's pretty well substantiated rumor. So I'm pretty comfortable putting it out there. But Mavic is apparently coming back to the United States. So we don't have any real info yet, certainly no official info, but it's apparently actually happening. It's not just going to be some half-hearted thing. It sounds like it's going to be wheels at first, maybe rims too, possibly followed by some of their soft goods, but we'll see. I am super intrigued to see what happens here. Because it's been a few years now since Mavic has pulled out of the US, and it was definitely not a particularly smooth exit. They left a lot of people hanging. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of miscommunication. There was just a lot of confusion about what was going on then. And the fact that Mavic is coming back, I think, is very exciting, because for as much as Mavic had a reputation for being kind of overly conservative with their stuff, I do believe that their wheels were still very, very good, particularly if you were looking at like a lot of long-term aspects. But I'd say the wheel market now, it's just even in the last few years, has changed an awful lot since Mavic left. And the thing that I'm worried about with Mavic is whether or not they can actually kind of, whether they have a snowball's chance in hell of it being able to pull this off, just based on the fact that they're probably not going to be crazy inexpensive. And at this point, they've been gone for long enough that I feel like a lot of people just won't remember who they are.
Yeah, just to clarify, so we're talking about a direct subsidiary of Mavic,
correct?
Europe, but in North America, which is what they used to have, and what they've been without for the last few years through Mavic's transition from not knowing who its owner is to having a new owner and to restarting the brand.
Yes.
So that's definitely a big investment on Mavic's part, to open up a subsidiary again. I don't know, James. Like I agree. Like carbon wheels especially, have become very much a commodity item in recent years. With disc brakes have basically opened the door to that. And I think Mavic has definitely lost a huge amount of its market share that it once had. As has every company, basically. I mean, it's a pretty saturated market now. So, I don't know. I do wish them all the luck, though. I
would say, to answer your question, do they have any chance? I feel like we're going to have much more of a chance if they just ditch the soft goods and stick to wheels, what they're sort of known for.
Which I thought that was the whole business mission. Like when they got bought, I thought that's what they public announced.
We're ditching the soft goods, but we're still going to do shoes, and we're still going to do helmets, and we're going to keep these couple of jerseys and these few shorts, and we're going to keep this, and we're going to keep that. I said it on the presentation. I was like, "Wait a minute."
Right.
I mean, the wheels have always been a sort of, I don't know if aspirational is the right word, but certainly, you put Mavic wheels on a bike, at least in this part of the world, it sort of meant something. And at least the feeling I always had was that if you had like Mavic soft goods, it meant sort of the opposite. They didn't really, they seemed like perfectly good products and that, but they didn't really feel like Mavic products. And they also, I think, contributed to Mavic sort of losing their way. And I think if they just went back to making damn good wheel sets, that's probably what everybody wants to see. Like we're not really going to be all that disappointed if you can't buy a Mavic jersey anymore. But if you can't buy Mavic Cosmics that are up to date and a genuine option, then that does sort of make me a bit sad. So hopefully we can see those return.
I mean, I think as a general rule, anytime a company makes the decision to cash in some of their brand equity to expand into a category that is not one of their core competencies, that is always going to be a move that is pretty fraught with risk. And in fairness to Mavic, a lot of their non-wheel goods were pretty good, actually. Like the last generation of clothing that I tried for them was actually quite good. Although their shoes didn't necessarily fit my feet very well, I do know a lot of people who were very, very happy with them. They had some interesting innovations with shoes. Helmets were always just kind of like, for me. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff was brought on by the fact that they were purchased by Amer Sports back in the day, and they were kind of like the same company that owned Arc'teryx and stuff like that. So they were a soft goods company.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of that came from. So I would love to see Mavic kind of return to focusing on its core stuff, because I agree, for as much as their wheels weren't necessarily cutting edge, they were super, super solidly done, very well thought out, generally very highly engineered. I kind of put them in the same category as Fulcrum in a way that like they're not always as impressive on paper as they might be. Certainly not always the cheapest, but they often seemed like they were just generally very, very well thought out.
You're never really riding down the road thinking, is this tire working with this rim, or is it all going to fall apart at any second?
Yeah, there's a lot of trust in that product. Barring the original Asus wheels. But that's, I mean, there is like a lot of, there's certainly, you can assume that they've done their testing with those wheels, and that you're going to mount a tire up and it's not going to be a bear to use, and it's going to inflate the way a tubeless tire should, and everything's just going to work out. And that's sort of what you're paying for with a Fulcrum wheel set and with the Mavic wheel set and with the Shimano wheel set, is these companies are very conservative, but that also results in a product that isn't the latest and greatest, but works.
And it's funny, I don't really know how Mavic is going to conduct their marketing in the US moving forward as they come back into this market. But I kind of see a lot of parallels between Mavic and like Toyota, for example. Like in the automotive world, Toyota is absolutely not seen as like a on the edge innovator. Like they are definitely not ones to push the envelope and like really push the extremes as far as, technology and being at the forefront of stuff. And even though their cars and trucks are almost never the absolute best at anything, a lot of times they're pretty mediocre. In fact, like, people love the Toyota Tacoma, for example, but virtually any other mid-sized truck is quite a lot better than that. But they still sell a ton of stuff because it's a Toyota, and they have this very well-earned reputation for high-quality assembly and reliability and that sort of thing. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that Mavic could potentially bank on, but that's hard. That's a hard thing to convey, particularly if you're just coming back into a market and you don't have a whole lot of legacy to bank on.
Yeah, and in
recent legacy,
the most recent legacy as well, like burned a lot of people with hub reliability issues, and yeah, I mean, there's no other issue other than that. But I mean, that's enough cause to be shy of a brand. So yeah, I think I think they'll succeed. I don't think they're going to disappear again, but I don't believe we're going to see Mavic return to the prominence that it once had, unfortunately.
Wasn't it Mavic track wheels that British Cycling once said were like rounder than the other round wheels that the other nations had in the Olympics? And that was, I can't remember if that was an April Fool's or if that was like a joke at the time of the Olympics, but I'm pretty sure it was Mavic that, I think it was Dave Brailsford had said, yeah, our wheels are really good because they're just so much rounder.
Such a good claim.
I don't really know how much credence I gave to that.
No, there was there was nothing behind it, but I'm pretty sure it made the headlines at the time.
Rumor, technically, but it's pretty good rumor. We'll keep our ears to the ground on this one, but just I don't know. We'll see what happens. Speaking about brand stuff in general, Dave, you recently published a piece on how seemingly every mountain bike brand on the planet is trying to get a piece of the gravel bike pie. What did you find here?
That every mountain bike brand on the planet is trying to get a piece of the gravel pie. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much all except for Yeti. Yeti have basically announced that they're not developing a gravel bike. It seems there's some friendships there with Open that have existed for quite a few years, and that will continue. That one surprised me because Yeti have done a drop bar bike in the past with a cyclocross bike, a pretty limited edition one, but it feels to me like a lot of Yeti customers would buy a Yeti gravel bike if they released one. But Yeti's historically quite conservative. I mean, they were very late with like 29ers, for example, and then when they finally released one, they called it the Big Top in reference to it being like a circus bike.
Clown bike, I believe, Dave. Clown bike.
Clown bike, there you go. So, I mean, it's, yeah. So that one, Yeti are out. Transition kind of gave me we're not really developing one, but we might develop one kind of answer. And that's basically the extent of the mountain bike brands that don't have a gravel bike. It's only when you get to like the really niche brands where you start to see mountain bike brands that don't have gravel bikes. It's like the We Are One and the Gorilla Gravity and the
right. But otherwise, like your Santa Cruz and Pivot and like Common Sol's a pretty recent one. YT, like they're all of these brands.
They're all in. Yep. Like Santa Cruz, there's a new Stigmata coming. We've seen it. It won Leadville, I believe. And not Leadville. Unbound. Yes. And that's kind of got some cool, like down tube storage built into it. It's got new geometry. It looks like it's suspension ready. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of investment. And speaking with everyone, it seems like they generally across the industry, they think gravel still has quite a bit of growth left in it. And I think that's especially true outside of the US. I think the US still has some growth left in it, but the US has been the real boom market. And I think we're seeing other areas of the world now catching on to that boom.
So this past weekend, I was up in Fort Collins, Colorado, just a little bit north of me, and I attended this event called the Foco Fondo. I can't remember how many years it's been around, but it's a mixed terrain event. It's kind of mostly gravel, but it's gotten pretty big. They have almost 2,000 participants, and I made a point of just talking to a bunch of random amateur riders, partially because I wanted to see what they were riding and how much they had spent on stuff. So you can expect a little story and gallery from that coming soon. But the majority of people I talked to, they had gotten into, well, pretty much everyone had gotten into gravel for one of two reasons. Either they were already longtime roadies and didn't want to share space with cars anymore for good reason. And then kind of a smaller percentage of people, they were mountain bikers who kind of wanted to be able to check out some other terrain, recover a little bit more ground, and kind of just do something a little bit different. But it was pretty clear from the people that I talked to and just looking at some of the numbers. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that gravel is saturated in the U.S. yet. The growth has certainly started to level off a little bit, but the people who thought that gravel was just sort of like going to be this fad that's going to fade away, and that's clearly not going to happen.
No, No. And it's like, I mean, this is nothing new. We've been saying this for 5+ years, but it's very much the crossover point. We're seeing hardcore roadies getting into mountain bike, having been through the gravel phase or been through the gravel interest point, I guess. And then at the same time, I've met quite a few hardcore mountain bikers who had never previously considered drop bar bikes, who are now on like aero road bikes based on how much fun they had with gravel bikes. So yeah, I mean, it really is this perfect crossover point for the bike industry. So it makes absolute sense as to why every brand wants a piece of it. But it's just quite it was quite amusing to sort of see the last few holdout brands in the mountain bike space sort of jump into the scene all within the last 6 months, like the likes of Intense and Common Cell and
Evil. They've been in for a little while now, but
Evil's been but yeah, you've even got like brands like Rottwild in Europe who have launched an e-gravel bike. So yeah, and what's the other one I'm trying to think of? Mondraker. They launch an e-gravel bike. So it's just everyone wants a piece of the pie, or no one wants to miss out. Anyway, that article's up. Check it out.
Last bit of news that I want to get to before we talk about what's on our mind is we have a new announcement from RockShox. They've got a new range of SID forks and shocks. So the biggest news on the fork are some new multi-position compression dampers, updated air springs. The most interesting dampers have got 3-position setup. They've got open, pedal, and lock positions, which seems very reminiscent of the old Fox CTD stuff from a really long time ago. But anyway, you can adjust those. You can adjust those compression settings on the fly, either with a manual dial on the crown or remotes. RockShox says also the updated air springs have more negative air volume, new coil instead of rubber top-out springs, so they're more sensitive on smaller stuff than they were before. They also have some mild chassis updates, including some more aggressively machined aluminum crowns that we've kind of spotted here and there. But also they have longer stanchions for more bushing overlap and more bushing separation, which is very much a good thing. It should make the fork stiffer for better handling. They still top out at 120 mils of travel. Prices range. I mean, it's a premium product apparently, so their price ranges from $900 to $1,000 US. So none of them are cheap. The updated SID Lux wrist shocks also get some new 3-position compression dampers on some of them with the same open pedal and lock positions. Also some updated valving that's supposedly more active on square edge stuff. Longer bottom-out bumpers for kind of a gentler landing if you approach full travel. So you can expect to see these on a bunch of new Trek and Specialized and Santa Cruz and BMC Canyon transition bikes any day now. These changes sound good because I've spent a whole lot of time on current gen SID stuff, and I have found them to be kind of a little bit firm for my liking, even for an XC suspension. So I think this should make them more competitive, I would think, or at least make them feel a little bit more like some of the Fox stuff that's out there, I would think.
Yeah. So just to clarify, there's still the 2 models. You've still got the SID SL, which is 32 mil stanchion diameter.
Yes, correct. Sorry. That
has been bumped up to, you can either get that in either 100 or 110 mil travel. So that's now a new longer travel version there. Turns out that is the fork that sits on the front of the Specialized Epic World Cup that I've had for a couple of months, which RockShox were unusually quiet about that fork. And yeah, then there's the SID, which is the 35 mil stanchion, 100 to 120 mil travel version.
Yes, sorry, there are 2 versions. Excuse me. Pardon me. Thanks for the clarification, Dave.
Yeah, and they've gone from the black version. They've updated. Previous version had the SID Ultimate had silver decals on it, and they've now copied me because I'd changed my SID Ultimate to have white decals to match my frame, and that's where SID have now gone. So I'm taking full credit for that, even though I don't think I ever posted about that. But there you go. So
and even though you're certainly not going to get any royalty checks out of that either.
No. But yeah, my old SID now looks like a new one. So don't know how I feel about that.
Well, I do think these are good changes for anyone who is out there on a current SID. I did send a note to SRAM's mountain bike PR person to ask if those new internals could be retrofitted into current chassis, and I have not heard back yet. I'm sure that would not necessarily be a super inexpensive endeavor, but would be cheaper than buying a new fork. So something to think about. But anyway, some of this new product has started trickling in on some test bikes, one of which is behind me that I can't talk about yet. But they do seem to ride better, so that's a good thing. So good to see good to see that stuff improving. All right, well, that'll wrap it up for the news segment of Geek Warning this week. I apologize for some of the background noise that people may be hearing here. I am not only sitting next to a very well-traveled hummingbird feeder here, so there's a lot of bird wing flapping here going, and I'm also next to some train tracks, and there's a train going by at the moment. So sorry for all the background noise. Anyway,
James bringing all the vibes,
all the vibes. At least it's not raining and thundering and lightning this time, so that's an improvement. Anyway, either of you have anything on your mind and perhaps over the heads of your family this week?
No, I was so unwell that I didn't actually spend. You're not going to believe this, but I didn't spend a single dollar for 7 days straight.
You've told me this already, and surely you must have bought something even just to like help you recover.
No, well, like my wife did. She went out and did the shopping and stuff. But me personally, I did not spend a single dollar.
So that's apparently what is required to get you to not buy tools. Is you need to be deathly ill, in bed, and semi-conscious.
Yeah. I need to be like hospital level unwell to not buy tools.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, so
okay.
Anyway, so now I'm trying to make up for lost time.
Well, Dave, I've been making up for it. Not necessarily buying tools, but I think I've picked up a little bit of something from you, and that I've been buying just aero stuff that I don't need.
Oh no!
For
I don't know if you can blame that on me.
No, but it's I definitely felt like I needed something that I was just so I was in solidarity with you. You know, spending our money on things that we really don't need any more of.
Yeah. Is there a sense of desperation knowing that you've got a second child on the way, thinking that this might be the last time for a while that you could buy this stuff?
There very much was, yes.
Okay.
Very, very, very much was. There was no expense spared in the pursuit of every single second.
I don't know what you're talking about, Ronan. Kids are not expensive at all. Like there'll be plenty of discretionary income left, no question.
This kid's already cost me a couple of bikes, I think, in missed test ride opportunities over the next month or so. So he's not even born yet, and he's already costing me bikes.
James's garage is getting quite full while you're missing out.
Oh my god! Picking up a lot of slack here, guys. Picking up a lot of slack.
One thing that has been on my mind this evening, just before we came to this, was the UCI has just published its list of equipment registered for inspection at the Glasgow Track World Championships next week, and my wife was sitting watching Love Island as I was typing up a story about this equipment list. So you can check out that story. It's on the site right now as we speak. But the more I went through this list, and there's about 400 different new items listed on this list of equipment that has to be registered at Glasgow to be used at the Paris Olympics next year. And every single brand that I got to was like a new, wow, what is this? What is this? What is this? So I spent about an hour before we came onto this podcast just like randomly WhatsApping and messaging and emailing different brand representatives with nothing other than the name of a new product they're about to get registered, a set of eyes emojis, and a question mark, and just sat back and watched the reactions roll in.
Top 3 most intriguing things on the list? Any, like, off the top of your head, what was
top 3 most intriguing
got the heart
things?
racing?
There's a few new frames. There's a new track frame from BMC. There's one from Factor. There seems to be a new track frame from Pinarello, which has got the same name as that 3D printed one we seen last year, but with a C instead of 3D. So I'm wondering, is there like a carbon version of that? Yeah,
so.
Coming instead of a 3D printed version. But I think what really sort of caught my eye was, and now I'm taking a complete mind blank. I was getting somewhere and I should have just got there instead of. Oh yes, the thing that really caught my eye was Hope Tech even have a new HBT Paris on the list, which is not the HBT that broke the internet a few years ago. So maybe it's a slight upgrade. Maybe it's a slight update. Maybe it's a complete overhaul. Maybe it's definitely the latter of those two from the rumors I'm hearing. But either way, I think we're about to find out in the very near future. So that one really caught my eye.
Maybe Hope and Team GB are doing a complete 180 and they're going like hyper narrow now instead of hyper wide.
I don't want to get into it because I don't know if there's any truth in it up, but the rumors I'm hearing is that there are more tubes getting wider, not anything getting narrower. So it was the seats days before, wasn't it?
Seats days and fork blades.
And apparently there are more things getting wider for this latest iteration.
Intriguing.
Wow. Flared gravel handlebars.
Is there anything?
The bars might be getting narrower. Actually,
Is there anything in the regulations to keep a frame from being so wide that it keeps people from passing you?
There is an outer width measurement for. Is it like 52 centimeters or something? I can't exactly remember, but there is an outer width that your bike can
52 centimeters is pretty wide.
Or maximum width.
Yeah,
I mean it is. Yeah, definitely. I'm kind of wondering if you could do like super narrow handlebars with like just little wings coming out the edge of them. The other thing that caught my eye on the list was a whole rake of new wheels, unsurprisingly, I guess, given that it's Track World Championship coming up and ultimately the same stuff that will be used at the track in the Olympic Games next year. And then the amount of clothing on this list is just mind-boggling. And like just 10, 15, 20 different items from each brand almost, likes of AGU, Castelli, Vortec, especially Callas, Q36.5, BioRacer have a whole host of different options there. And I think what that is they're, and this is all the stuff that I wanted to talk with Rachel earlier, but she was watching Love Island, so we couldn't really get into the reasons why you would need so many different skin suits. But I think that's for, the high speeds that the track sprinters were doing versus team pursuit speeds. Why can't I say that tonight? Versus, bunch racing speeds. So yeah, I was fascinated by each of the new things that I kept coming across on this list.
There's positional differences as well, right? And there's also body differences. Like the track sprinters are built very differently to a pursuit rider. So
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
And I mean, the other big question mark around all of this is why the UCI can scan frames and measure frames and weigh frames and wheels and handlebars and this, that, and the other. How do they actually check if the skin suit that was registered is the same skin suit that is used on the day of the Olympics? And there's all sorts of rumors and accusations floating around since Tokyo that a lot of the stuff that turned up in Tokyo wasn't actually stuff that was registered, and the UCI didn't really do anything about it, and they're promising they will if the same happens again next year. But yeah, it's I mean, I didn't really know what to think about this equipment registration process on the track until tonight when I seen this list pop up, and I was like, I absolutely love this because this is just it gets the hype going for the Track World Championships like nothing else could have. And speaking to a few of the brands, not tonight, but actually in the build up, throughout this year, what I'm hearing is a lot of these brands plan to run this equipment because the equipment has to be run in competition for it to be used in the Olympics. And what a lot of them are planning to do is actually have it run in like the qualifying heats at like 6 a.m. or something for 2 laps, or the absolute minimum at the absolute quietest point of the day. And then it was used in competition. It might not have been used a heck of a lot, but they sort of keep it under wraps.
Do we have any sense as to how much of this new how much of this new track tech might also find its way onto time trial bikes?
I mean, Hope did try to do it with they made a time trial version of the HPT from Tokyo. Never really took off all that much, and my understanding is that you're basically getting like very, very low yaw angles on the track, and it's not really all that representative when you then go outdoors. So, you know, how much we'll actually see in the road, I'm not sure, but, and even that of which we do, how actually transferable it is to the outdoors is another question mark entirely. I think some of the technology around like overshoes and these aero base layers and presumably helmets and that will make its way outdoors. Maybe some of the wheel sets could be converted for road bikes, time trial bikes. But I think the frames and that, it seems now that most of the manufacturers and nations who are really clued into this stuff are making almost entirely different frames and wheel sets for track versus road.
Yeah. My understanding from one source who are designing a bike for a nation is that the funding, not always the case, but in this case, the funding from the nation is certainly enough that it's sort of a self-funding marketing exercise almost. Like they don't necessarily need to get a saleable product out of this because of the way it's funded. So it's not like they're burning through their own marketing budget to create it. They're being paid. It's a contract. They're being paid to do it, and the outcome is a product that hopefully will win a gold medal, but at the same time they don't need to be able to commercialize it for road use or whatever. They don't need to have learn anything through the R&D process that's actually relevant to road. It can be its own standalone project.
Big deep pockets, basically.
Yeah, and that's certainly not the case for a lot of nations. Like there are some big nations still fighting for gold at the Olympics who they need to attract sponsors basically to fund their teams. But yeah, some of the nations really do have big government funded budgets for success. So,
and I think that was a takeaway for me from this list that just emerged tonight was, you know, the UCI's rationale behind the registration process is that it's basically their way of ensuring that there's, I think they call it fair and equitable access to equipment and, you know, across all the events for all the teams and riders. And it struck me tonight just looking at how many different models some of these brands have is that it doesn't really achieve that. It just means that all these brands have to register everything in advance. They still can create much more and do much more R&D and bring much more to the events than the smaller nations and the smaller brands can. They just have to register it ahead of time. And the theory is that once it's registered, you can then buy it. But I mean, I dare say you might be able to order it. They are definitely getting stricter on that whole commercialization aspect. But, you know, first of all, our nation's going to want to spend whatever price tag is attached to these things. The UCI obviously can't control what sort of price a brand would demand for a piece of equipment. And then even getting down to the fact that one of the brands listed for a series of wheel sets and frames and that on the list is named as TBC, to be confirmed. I'm pretty sure, unless there's a brand I'm not aware of that's called TBC. But, you know, I mean, if that doesn't scream that this is an exclusive product that, you know, we haven't even decided what the brand's called yet, but it's registered for inspection at Glasgow World
Cup
or World Championships. Yeah. So I don't think anything's ever really going to change there. It just means that I get a bit of excitement sitting down finding a list on the UCI's website.
Ronan, do you have any plans to go to Track Worlds?
I don't know. I have plans to be in a hospital around about the same time.
Right,
due date is around about the same time, so
might be kind of hard to get away.
Might be, yeah. I mean, coincidentally, due date is also time trial day, so I mean, it was meant to be, wasn't it?
Well, we already have one, well, I guess now former colleague who has missed the birth of a child because of work obligations. So I would prefer that we not make that list grow by one. So you should stay home.
as much as I would like to be there, I would prefer to be here.
Yeah, you know, track worlds will come around again. All right. Well, let's we're about out of time here. Let's finish up with a PSA. Anyone have anything? Because if no one else has one, I do.
Use yours, James.
Okay. Well, Dave, you will have to. I seem to have a habit of repeating things that were used in previous episodes, so you'll have to tell me if this happened already.
I'm sure it has.
But I would like to just lend a reminder or put a reminder out there to people to, if you're using disc brakes, to not just check your disc brake pad wear, but also your rotor wear.
I don't think we've done this one.
Really? How about that?
It's been top of my mind because I'm writing an article about changing disc brake pads. But before I do that, I'm doing an article about bedding in. Surprisingly big topic. Yes, but go on.
So, I mean, it's not just your pads that wear out. Your rotor surface does get eaten away as well. And rotor manufacturers will always have a minimum rotor thickness that they publicize somewhere. Not always the easiest to find, but sometimes it's actually laser etched right onto the rotor itself. Some rotors, not very many, but some rotors also have wear indicators. I think Jaguar does this, and I think Swiss Stop does it as well. But I mean, obviously, if your rotor gets too thin, that could be a safety issue. But the other thing to consider is that rotors and pads don't always wear evenly. It's not too different from your car, for example. So even if your rotor is still within spec for thickness, it may not be within spec in terms of whether the faces are both parallel to each other. And if you were to have a rotor like that and you stick in some new pads, then your braking will work, but it won't be optimal. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have some calipers, that's definitely the easiest way to check the thickness of your rotor. But that's also a good way to check if the two sides are parallel, because generally speaking, the jaws of some calipers are usually pretty good at being parallel. And if they don't line up with the sides of your rotor, then that's probably a good indication that they are no longer parallel, and you should get a new one.
Yeah, the caliper, using calipers can be fraught with error as well, because a lot of the time people have their disc brake set up where the pad actually sits a millimeter below the top edge of the rotor, and that'll actually mean that the center of the rotor brake track gets worn, while the outside external diameter lip of the rotor actually remains kind of fresh. So if you were to put a caliper onto the rotor to measure it, the caliper will measure the widest point, which is the unworn lip. So you can actually see this. If you were to put a regular vernier caliper onto the rotor and you've got this issue, you'll actually see that the center of the rotor kind of sits indented from where the caliper is sitting. So yeah, the way around that is to use like a micrometer or a thickness gauge is what they call it, which kind of just gives you 2 points, 2 smaller points to measure off of. And then that way you can kind of measure the center of the brake track and overcome that issue.
Yeah.
If your brakes are perfectly set up and are actually wearing onto the very edge of the rotor, then that's not an issue either.
Yeah, I guess even if you have a little bit of that gap, like you were talking about, Dave, I mean, sometimes with depending on the calipers you have, sometimes you can kind of almost kind of like angle the calipers a little bit so that the measuring portion of the jaws sits in the middle of the rotor. So sometimes you can get away with that as well. But either way, measure those things. Keep an eye on how thin they're getting. I definitely follow a bunch of mechanic Instagram accounts that are pretty entertaining as far as how far people let things go every now and then.
Yeah,
but
because it gets to a point like where the thinner rotor means your pads are progressing further out than they're designed to. So you end up exposing the pistons more, and you can end up getting leaking calipers and other issues like that. The other issue is that if you really leave it too long, eventually the brake track just separates from the rotor.
Mm-hmm. Quite a sight. It makes for quite a good Instagram photo.
Yeah.
You mentioned the micrometer there, Dave. I think you'll find it's a micrometer.
Yes.
No.
Yes. No, you're right. You're right. Yeah. Anyway.
No, I'm very, very wrong. But when I see micrometer written down, my brain says micrometer.
Yeah. All right. I think I don't think you're wrong. I just think we're both right.
Okay.
Maybe we should run a poll on the Geek Warning channel in the Discord group here.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, regardless, it's that is a very good PSA.
How about that?
I would say, experience-wise, I'd say generally you probably get 2 to 3 sets of pads off a rotor before it meets minimum thickness.
Yeah, depending on what kind of pads you run.
Yeah. Yeah, but like a Shimano Road running resin pads, that's kind of been my experience. It's like, yeah, by the third set, you're normally at the minimum thickness.
Or, yeah, as I told a friend of mine the other day, if you just don't ride your stuff lasts forever.
It does.
All right. Anyway, it's about to start thunder and lightning out here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up before I start getting wet. Thanks as always for listening to Geek Warning. We always appreciate your listeners out there. Just another reminder, if you are not already an Escape Collective member, please consider doing so, or at least subscribing. It really does help us out because, again, this is a member and subscriber funded operation here. We do not have any sponsors or ads. And if you have not yet left us a rating and review on iTunes, please do so as well, because, again, it does really help a lot of people find this show, which helps us out immensely, certainly more than you realize. And I will say, after a couple weeks ago, when I requested a bunch of people to leave some fresh ratings and reviews, there did appear to be a bunch of fresh ratings and reviews pop up. So thank you very much for everyone who took the time to do that. So, yeah, that's about all I've got today. So, I guess unless anyone else has anything to add, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.